I'd like to welcome and say good evening to Mrs. Karen Sethill. Thank you very much. We're ready to begin.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Doron. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Sethill, and I would like to send a very warm welcome from Jerusalem to you to this third event in our series, Listening to the Noise of National Libraries Around the World. We are delighted to be hosting tonight Dr. Tomasz Makowski, Director of the National Library of Poland. It is a real pleasure to welcome audiences from Poland, Israel, and as we can see, from around the world. In fact, our moderator this evening is based in the USA. And I would like to introduce our esteemed friend and colleague, Dr. Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimblett, who will be interviewing our speakers this evening, after which they will take your questions. And as Doron said, please write these in the chat. Barbara is Ronald S. Lauder Chief Curator of the core exhibition at Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw and University Professor Emerita at New York University. She received the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland and was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. In 2019, she was awarded the prestigious Dan David Prize. She currently advises Jewish museums in Vienna, Berlin, Moscow, Albania, Belarus, and Lithuania. So Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. I'd like to start by thanking you, Karen, and Doron Levin for all of the assistance that you have provided in making this program possible. And of course, I especially want to thank Oren Weinberg for the kind invitation to today's conversation. So our task today is to really discuss the nature of national museums. And we have two cases which share some characteristics and are really very different in other ways. I think one of the characteristics is how a national museum, if you will, functions in the absence of a state. And this is, I think, a topic that I would be very interested in hearing about as we begin our conversation. So let me begin by introducing our first National Museum Director, Dr. Tomasz Makowski. Dr. Makovsky is an expert in manuscripts and the history of libraries. He became Director General of the National Library of Poland in 2007. Before that, he was Director of Research and Head of Special Collections, having started in the Manuscripts Department in 1994. He chairs the Polish Libraries Council and is Vice Chair of the Polish Committee of the UNESCO Memory of the World Program. He has written 4 monographs and is the author of numerous scientific articles. Dr. Makowski, I think perhaps before we begin our conversation with you about your library, we might bring up a short video. And before we show the video, I just want to say that you have 2 buildings, and your historic building, I actually live right next door to it. And I walk by it every single day on my way to the museum. I know it well. So let's bring up your video and then we'll begin. Well, thank you. I thought that if you would share with us something about the beginnings. How did your library begin? It has a very particular and interesting history, and I thought we would start there, and then we would turn to Oren's description of the beginnings of the National Library of Israel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this kind invitation. Thank you, Oren. Thank you, Barbara. It's a great pleasure to have this meeting this evening in Jerusalem, this afternoon in Warsaw, and this noon in New York. So we did it, we did this film especially for you, Barbara. That's obvious that we wanted to show so close to you this building. But please know that the recording of Chopin's Prelude you could hear is made over 100 years ago by outstanding pianist Jan Paderewski, who was also Prime Minister of Polish government. So it's noteworthy that we have this recording in our collections and we use it in our film. But this is a small part of our history. Yes, indeed we have very complex history as always in our soil. Next year we celebrate the 275th anniversary of the opening of the National Library of Poland. It was one of the first national libraries in Europe. A program of its library of activities and mission of this library was published in 1732, and the library is open to the public in 1747. In 18th century, it was the biggest library open to the public in Europe with 400,000 volumes and more than 10,000 medieval and early modern manuscripts. This library passed into state hands and began with good reason to be called the Library of the Commonwealth, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Republic actually, thanks to its rich collections and its public character. And it was indeed one of the first libraries in the world intended to fulfill the tasks of a modern national library in developing collections covering the entire body of Polish literature and making those works accessible to the public. Polish Parliament granted the library the right to receive a free legal deposit copy of every book printed in the country. After the partition of Poland, when Warsaw was invaded by Russian troops in 1794, the National Library was closed for 123 years. The collections of the library were taken as a war booty to St. Petersburg, capital of Russia Empire, where they formed the core of the newly founded Russian Imperial Library. After Poland regained its independence in 1914, after the First World War, the National Library of Poland was established for the second time. During the Second World War, Poland lost 70% of all its library collections, institutional and private, through willful destruction, war damages, or theft. This included parts of its most precious collections, those stored in the National Library in Warsaw, where 50,000 manuscripts and 60,000 incunabula and early printed books, print and drawing collections, maps, music scores, and many books and periodicals were burned. This loss is unequaled in the modern history of libraries. As a symbol of this destruction of the National Library by Germans in 1944, when it was intentionally set on fire, there is a glass urn containing the ashes of burned books collected by librarians for future generations. For us, I think for all librarians, not only for Polish librarians, it is a precious memorial. Due to these two breaks in its functioning and the destruction of most of the collections, first by the Russians, then by the Germans, the library twice had to restart its work practically from scratch. After the Second World War, the National Library opened for the third time. Hopefully, the last time it has to do so. Today, we have 10 million items, including 34 manuscripts, almost 200,000 incunabula and early printed books, almost 400,000 image collection, prints and drawings, photographs, more than 100,000 maps, printed music sheets. We receive almost 200,000 new items every year.
Well, that is, I have to say, it's really a heartbreaking story. And it's a very Polish, unfortunately, it's a very, very Polish story. So I want to come back to a number of issues that the history of your library raises. But first, I'd like to turn to our second library director. I'd like to turn to Oren Weinberg, who is the CEO of the National Library of Israel, starting from 2010. Oren supervises the ongoing National Library of Israel operations, their renewal activities, and the construction of the new building, which is quite spectacular, as you'll see in a moment. Prior to joining the National Library, Oren was the director of the Haifa University Library. He's an active member of the Directors of National Libraries group and participates in the IFLA conferences and other professional gatherings. So Oren, before I have you say something about the history of the National Library of Israel, let's bring up a short video that's really showing the current project, which is to create a brand new, I would say, not only building, but campus for the National Library.
For more than 120 years, the National Library in Jerusalem has been dedicated to preserving Jewish and Israeli culture and history, the beating heart of the Jewish people. The National Library is in the midst of a renewal process that aims to transform it into a central player in the cultural lives of the citizens of Israel, of Jews abroad, and people around the world. The new library building will be built in Jerusalem's National Precinct, facing the Knesset building and adjacent to the Israel Museum. Visitors to the new complex will enjoy 6 floors of state-of-the-art reading halls, a modular culture and education area, and a contemporary visitor center.
The building reflects the history, and the history is reflected in the building. It's literally carved out like a piece of stone, like a book that you open. The circle is, of course, bringing daylight in. But the circle continues its way down to the sea of books, where the books are stored. So it's like a water pond, like a well. So it's related even to history, to find water.
The concept or the plan for the new library is the country is to open, to welcome, to be transparent, to bring in as much as possible of different kinds of people.
You do building that make people happy. That is a place that people want to go. They want to be at that new place because it's part of their heart.
I know what it means for Israeli people. I know what it means also to the world. So it's not only a Jewish project. I think from my point of view, it's a project that goes beyond that.
So Oren, please give us a little bit of a sense of the history of the National Library of Israel.
Well, good evening, Barbara. Good evening, Tomasz. And I'm very happy to see you here, and thank you for joining us in the National Library series of the NLI. I must say that hearing Tomasz' description of the history of National Library of Poland shows how much similarities are between the two histories of the library. even that ours is much shorter. But I think that again, it's interesting to see that the roots of the National Library of Israel comes from actually Poland. We look at one of the founders of the idea of the National Library of Israel, to Dr. Yosef Chazanovich, who was a physician in Bialystok in 1878. He traveled at that time to the land of Israel, or at that time in 1890. And his life project was to develop a collection of a library collection for the establishing of a library in Jerusalem. His vision was that all books that are written in Hebrew and all books that are written in every language that talk about Jews and their culture should be collected and brought to Jerusalem. In 1895, he sent 8,800 books in 34 crates to Jerusalem. And actually, this was the basic collection of the National Library of Israel at that time. He saw that with Arzasan, its leader at that time, that there should be a library in Jerusalem, a Hebrew library. And this would also be a foundation for a university, a Hebrew university, when it will be founded. So in 1925, when the Hebrew University was formed, the library at that time was actually joined to the university and became what was from that time the university and national library. And it was part of the Hebrew University until lately. If I'll just put some earmarks in the history of the library, in 1948, when in the independent war, then the library building was in Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, and this area was demilitarized and after the war, and the library had to pull out of all of its books to West Jerusalem and place it in different buildings. So it wasn't a destruction, but it was certainly a major obstacle in the life of both of the users and the library. And in 1960, the current building was built in Givat Ram campus. And this is the building that we are situated right now. The library served mainly the university population. And this was the regular, let's say, business of the library until the government passed a law, or the Knesset passed a law in 2007, that only then, so many years after the establishment of the State of Israel, a real national library was formed. So in 2007, the library separated from the university and became an independent entity owned by the government and the Hebrew University. And from that time, we started the process that we call it the renewal of the National Library. So serving not only research needs, but becoming a public institution that takes care of the collections of the State of Israel, but also by law, it also became the library of the Jewish people at large. So we're also in charge of collecting and serving the Jewish communities around the world. And in this process that we probably will mention briefly in the talk, we're also building a new building that you can see in the screen behind me, and you heard in the short film. We are planning to move there next year when the building is finished. Our collection today are smaller than the NLP collections, of course, but we have some 4 million items. And we accept yearly at least 100,000 new items. We serve a very varied audiences today, and the idea is to enlarge and serve all sectors of the society, both physically and digitally. And I stop at that.
Thank you very, very much, Oren. Well, you know, I think if we say National Library, it seems self-evident. We know what we think we know what national means, and we think we know what library means. But actually, it is not so straightforward. And so I have a couple of thoughts that I would love to hear your reflections on, and that is, what does it actually really mean to speak of a national library? And here, what I'll just add a couple of points as a way of getting the conversation going. And that is, in what sense is it national, especially in the absence of a state, for example, whether it's the 123 years of the partition period or it's before the state of Israel was declared. So what does it mean to have a national library in the quote absence of a state? My second question in that regard is, how has the concept of national vis-a-vis the National Library evolved? We've already heard from Oren that it's evolved to some degree to be a library of the Jewish people, which is a particular way of thinking about a, quote, national library. In the case of Poland, is the National Library national in a sense of Poland as a nation state or Poland as a state of nations? So these are, I would say, my sort of starting points for asking what's national, or how are we to understand national when we think of a national library, and how has that concept evolved over time with regard to your two institutions? So I don't know, Tomasz, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. We find many similarities in the past and in the present in our libraries, in both our libraries, because we have situation and we have library in the capital of state and we have great diaspora abroad. So there are more similarities that we could imagine before. But answering your question right now, we rewrote our mission to be more national library. National library, it means for us to be everyone's library, every member of the society, our nation. So when we consider National Library, we think that we are not close only to researchers we had 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but we are just open for everyone. So we rewrote our mission several years ago to be more open, to be more accessible. Of course, National Library is based on fundamental values, including inclusiveness and diversity. And especially in those countries which had this fate not have a state, not to have solid institution responsible for duties, many state duties. We can understand how important it is to keep this inclusiveness and diversity in our stacks and our policy. So we want to demonstrate that everybody is welcome here, not only in the present, but also with their own history. So it was obvious for us that we are, as a library, as a National Library, part of the modern world, but as an institution responsible for preserving the heritage of the state, the many different nations that lived in it, many different cultures, religions, and languages. And as national libraries, national repositories, we are not judges of history, we are custodians. We cannot change the past, but we can do a lot to preserve the memory of the past, of things as they were. So national libraries as a special space for dialogue between the past and the present. This discussion, of course, is called history, what we know about the past. But this special space we called National Library as this dedicated place when the past can dialogue with the present. Poland is today more multicultural, has more languages and more religions than 30 years ago, for instance. Now we have hundreds of thousands emigres from Ukraine, Belarus, other countries. So it's a different situation that we had 30 or 20 years ago. Many of them speak fluent Polish and have no problems, not any problem assimilating into Polish society. But we should remember that the first Polish kingdom and republic in one had many nations, many religions, many cultures and languages living together. The collapse of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the end of 18th century and the partitions of Poland but by foreign invaders not only eliminated Poland as an independent state for 123 years, but also put an end to a peaceful way of living, radically changing the situation of all minorities living in Polish soil. All this diverse state we have. Well, National Library of Poland plays multiple roles at the same time. As the biggest library in Poland, it provides readers with access to its unique collections. It acts as the central body for cataloging the latest publications for libraries in Poland. You have a system workflow of 24 hours cataloging for every publication. And as a country's central state library, it issues recommendations to the more than 30,000 libraries, including school, scientific, public libraries, which we have in Poland. When we set up an overall system for Polish libraries, our first step was to ensure a close strategic cooperation with the biggest and the oldest university library in Poland, the 14th century Jagiellonian Library in Krakow, one of the few in Poland to escape damage during the Second World War. Is our strategic partner in building the platform for libraries. Several factors make the National Library of Poland truly distinctive. For example, we carry on mass digitization. Now we have 3.5 million items digitized. It's about 20 million scans every year. We have mentioned 24 hours cataloging workflow. The National Library is a place of trust where eminent writers, intellectuals, and music composers keep their archives, their private papers. So we are this real repository for everything what is precious. Building the library's reputation as a place of state and national trust is one of our long-term goals. The National Library also provides libraries with funds for the purchase of books under a special government program. And of course, what makes us unique among other libraries in every country is the same in the National Library of Israel. We keep a copy of every single item published in Poland. During the pandemic, although we also carved out a new role for ourselves, our paramount concern was ensuring the safety of our employees and readers, both at the National Library and in the other Polish libraries, as well as issuing instructions on what libraries should be doing during the pandemic. We offered support for institutions which found themselves at a loss in these extraordinary circumstances. It was important for us, to the National Library, to embrace responsibility rather than trying to shirk it. In an extraordinary situation like this, the first actually in our lifetime we faced, many of our employees and those at other libraries were afraid. They needed to know that any decisions we took were both justified and necessary. It seemed to us that one of the biggest dangers would be trying to keep things just the way they were. In other words, a situation in which we knew that the virus was dangerous but didn't take any action because no one had told us what to do. Libraries, especially public libraries around the country, relied on the National Library. And we just found out how important it is, how important is a central library, even in digital world.
Great, thank you so much. It's a very, very inspiring vision of a library, and I'm struck by, and I know this is extremely important for the National Library of Israel as well, is the value placed in trust. And here I just want to stress that the library as an institution in a democratic society is really an institution that is trusted, that it holds the, if you will, the nation's treasures in trust, but also it has to be a trusted institution, especially as you were discussing its relationship, the relationship between the past and the present and the historical importance of the collections. So Oren, I'd like to turn to you for your response to what's national about a national library and how has that idea changed over time with regard to the National Library of Israel?
Well, I would start with a few maybe repeated comments of Tomasz, but I think that they should be emphasized. I think national libraries are trusted because they don't look at the immediate. They look in the future, in the long future. They are giving promise that everything that is deposited in them will be available in maybe hundreds and hundreds of years. And that the library is a safe, a cultural safe, that you can find everything. So it's both vastness and comprehensiveness of the cultural heritage of, and what Tomasz said is the memory of the state, the memory of the nation. And unlike many other institutions that are dealing with collecting, they don't care if something is used immediately. It might be sitting on the shelf for years and years, and somebody will need it maybe in 100 years. We are actually documenting not only the history, but also the daily life. So we try to capture the essence of a nation every day, every hour, sometimes in a more comprehensive way and sometimes in a sampling way, so we can be sure that everything is not lost. And I think this is the essence of a library. It is also a free institute that is open for everybody. And it is a place that people meet inside the physical location, but also digitally today, and engage in discourse and dialogue. I would quote something that I read yesterday. The San Francisco Public Library reopened yesterday, and there was a line of people waiting to come in, and one of them was asked, how was it to be without the library for so long? And he said, it's like losing a hand or being without the best friend for so long. So I think it is important to understand that this is a home for many people. This is a place that they feel at home. And this is something that is very important, I think, for most of the National Library, that they want the readers to feel at home. And this is also, if you remember, one of the architects in the short movie that we showed said that their target is that people will feel at home. I would also mention something that is very important, especially in a, let's say, troubled society or fractured society. Israel is a country of many immigrants, many religions, many languages, many opinions. Sometimes fierce dialogue is happening between everyone here. And the fact that we can offer inclusiveness of all is something that is very important for libraries at large, but especially for National Library. The fact that there is no censorship, no political influence, at least we hope that there is no political influence, because if we capture the memory of a nation, we should be sure that everything is allowed. Everything, no matter of the quality, no matter of the politics, no matter of the religion, no matter of the language. Everything should be allowed in, and everything should be allowed to be used. And I think those are very important, both to those that trust their archives at the library. It is important for them to be in what is sometimes a canonical decision of what is the representation, what is important. And this is why people feel that they can put their creation at the library. The NLI is also quite unique in the fact that it's not something that we expand because we want. We are outside of the boundaries of the State of Israel. The national role of the library is much broader because we are the nation, not only national, but the nation, the Jewish nation at large. So we have to understand not only what to collect, but also how to serve people far away with our collection that represent their lives, because we collect, as I said, not only the history, but also the daily life of every Jewish community. So if I take some example, we collect books, but we collect ephemeral material. For example, a poster from St. Petersburg, or an invitation card from Johannesburg, or a newspaper from New York that deals with the life of the Jews there. We also collect music, we collect photographs, we collect, of course, books, and today we even harvest what we call the Jewish internet. So we want to give value to those people that allows us to collect what they create. We want them to use it, and it's a very ambitious and a complex task, how we serve people in many countries and many languages. We want to give them value of the collection that we have. And this is part of what we called nation and national, both of them. So it's actually many layers that are put one on another that create the memory and the use of this memory in various ways.
Well, thank you, Oren. I think one of the themes that struck me in both of your comments was the emphasis on the library being extremely open to the public. And clearly, the history of the National Library of Israel is a history of becoming an independent institution rather than being an institution that is part of a university. and being oriented towards not only an Israeli public, but towards essentially a global public as a standalone, autonomous national library. And that's quite a big development only since 2007. So that I think is very, very interesting. And then from Tomasz's comments, the rewriting of the mission statement, so as to really place an emphasis on this openness, inclusiveness, and diversity. I think this reflects also developments in the museum field, but it's especially important in the case of these national libraries. But there's some other interesting contrasts also, because in Tomasz's account, you have a national library that has a very long history in its territory, in the territory of Poland, and is interested in collecting and also serving those who left Poland. But it's configured quite differently. In the case of the National Library of Israel, the state of Israel is very young. The diaspora is very old. The ingathering is relatively recent. It's a modern period. So that the notion of nation, if you will, shifts from being simply a kind of easy fit between state and nation to the Jewish people. And for me, the contrast and also the challenges of the forming of the collection and the sense of your public, I don't know whether either of you would like to comment on that contrast. Oren, I don't know, would you like to comment on the difference?
Well, I think that I would say that the challenge of serving international audiences, apart from addressing the needs of the local population in the state, is something that nobody would have dreamed to do 20 years ago. But
exactly.
That's the advantage of the digital age. The fact that we can now understand needs of somebody that's sitting thousands of kilometers far away from us, that speak another language, and we can target his needs in a very specific ways that we couldn't even dream before. And this goes to the digital revolution. It's not only about digitization, it's about understanding needs in a very unique way, on a specific needs of one user, not only looking at what we call one size fits all that we used to do in the past. The fact that we can unify collection by collaborating with other institutions is something that's so unique today. And I can maybe now also thanks again, Tomasz, that allows us to get a huge collection of Jewish press from Poland and put them in our portal of Jewish press from around the world. And we do that with many other countries as well. The fact that you can now look at a newspaper that was published in a historical event from 20, 30 different countries in all languages and see that on one place is something so unique. The fact that we can now digitize every Hebrew manuscripts, wherever it is, and put it in a shared platform from thousands of institutions, serves the research and the educated and the layman in ways, again, that nobody could dream before. And I think this is the power today. And this is the importance of a national library, because they are strong institutions. We always complained about budget, but we are very stable because we have long history. We are considered to be in some way majestic, or in the fact that we have such a history inside. And we can offer services that many other institutions cannot because of the inclusiveness and vastness.
Right. Thank you, Oren. Tomasz, do you want to respond? Tomasz, you're muted. Would you unmute, Tomasz?
Sorry. Oh, my fault. Well, so we have only challenges. As always, we have our history. We have responsibilities, and we have to challenge technologies and challenge new audience. So I agree with Oren that we have great possibility right now because we have stable budget and we are very digital developed. So we can deliver a good service for our old audience, our researchers coming, all these researchers coming to our on-site buildings, but we are open for everybody, not to the standard user, but to everybody with their needs. So we are open for that. Of course, we are not only for Poles living in Poland, but also abroad. And digital world allowed us to share all these services we have. That is why we invest a lot of money, and actually we are digitally oriented right now. But as always, as Oren mentioned, we are trying to open to our old audience as well. So we want to prepare some new reading rooms to deliver all services in the best way we can.
Okay, well, this actually brings me to a topic that interests me very, very much, and that is, since you can deliver so much digitally, since anybody can sit anywhere at any time and access your catalogs and access online digital scans of books and manuscripts and press, why do we need bricks and mortar? And why do we need physical books? Let me start there, and then I have a follow-up question. So Tomasz, do you want to start?
Oh, sorry. Well, of course, libraries are not just services such as digital. We are also places, and library will survive as a place of safety, reassurance, community, rest, regeneration, calm, learning, enjoyment, and we want to add solidarity in Poland, a place when a society can meet and can dialogue and have this possibility to use everything what civilization delivers. Well, for me, a library doesn't matter is that the public library or the national library is a cornerstone of every civil society. It is not only a window on the past, but a tool of modernization. And librarians can open the door to the aspiration of everybody, old and young. So we have right as a citizens, we have the right to read and the right to access to a library free of charge. And this is quite fortunate for us that we shifted from physical to digital very fast, and we can deliver good digital service. But of course, we're not trying to get rid of our old audience, and that is why we to approach to general public as a new for us, for the library to the building which is in the middle of park in city center is quite crucial if you want to have new users. We have very widely open doors.
Tell me, Tomasz, are physical books just about nostalgia?
Yes, of course. Remember, I'm a manuscript specialist. So for me, old-fashioned books are important. Maybe not printed as much as manuscript. So this is nostalgia, of course. We as a national libraries will survive with physical books because we are responsible for preserving at least 1 or 2 copies or every publication from our countries. So this nostalgia is obvious for us, because we know that our stacks will survive with this all physical books, all historical collections. And despite the increase in mass digital access, we must think about reading rooms, place when people can meet. Because sometimes, I remember one sentence from a 20th century librarian who said that in libraries, one talks rarely and little. Sometimes one sentence uttered there is worth several printed volumes. That is why libraries are important as places. And I'm not sure if I answer your question properly.
No, that's okay. Listen, as you can tell, I absolutely love books, real books. I consider them the material culture of, if you will, of writing, reading, and discussion. So nobody has to convince me of the value, no matter how much digital there is. Nobody has to convince me of the value of absolutely physical books. I'm a collector. I have a very large personal library. I love my books, no question about it. But let me put the question differently to Oren, and then I think we'll have time to open up for some questions. And that is, I think that the National Library of Israel is really making a case for what I would call the uniqueness and the value of the library experience. And that is why I think that the creating of an independent national library, placing it in this precinct near the Israel Museum and the Knesset, housing it in a spectacular new modern building where everything about the design and concept of the building is intended to be inspiring. In other words, there's when I think of what I call the library experience, there's an enormous difference between sitting in front of a laptop, whether it's in bed or at your desk or in a schoolroom or a lab or a cafe, and walking into the British Library, the New York Public Library, the National Library, the new National Library of Israel, the National Library of Poland, that everything about it, the architecture, the ambiance, if you will, the sort of, there was a word I think Tomasz used, I can't remember the word, but it's the word I would use that I think is similar, is a kind of nobility of the book, a kind of, a way of signaling the value of what books represent. It seems to me that this is all part and parcel of what we might call the library experience, which is not only about books, but about what's in them, which is why I think Tomasz's comment about the library as a meeting place, a forum, a place where things happen, and where its functioning is seen as more than, quote, delivering information, which includes, of course, the librarians, which are one of the library's greatest assets, these collection specialists who are, and having face-to-face contact with them, and not only through chat, on the computer. So I wonder, Oren, is maybe the last intervention here before we open up to questions, if you would like to say something about what I would call the uniqueness, the specialness, the value of what, for want of a better term, the library experience. So maybe if you could say something with regard to the National Library of Israel.
Well, I think that, first of all, it's a great question, because I think that I would start from maybe the building, the architecture, and then go to the book. Books are a medium to transfer ideas. And what we envision in a library building is the ability to transfer ideas from one to another and create or recreate on the base of what was created before, and reinvent ideas on the basis of what has been collected. Now, it also means that books are, when we look at books, we have respect We have respect to the written word because they represent the ideas. And what we also do in a building, in a library building, is we also respect the users. Respect the user and their ability to use those ideas. So then I like to take this idea to what was one of the essence of our new building. In many libraries today, mainly in academic libraries, there is a tendency, and also in public libraries, to take the collection out and to have it only as a meeting place. We thought that if we want to respect the user and respect the ideas, we should continue and give the right place for the books inside the building. So we asked the architects to place an emphasis on the books themselves, not as a decoration for the user, but something that they would use. And by the way, we talked about digital a lot, but books are still in use heavily. And the fact that the library has uniqueness in their collection, we called it the long tail. Hundreds of thousands of books are used once maybe, but they are still needed. And the fact that the NLI list collection are very young in a way means that they will take hundreds of years or until everything is freed from copyright. And until then, not everything is accessible to all. It's accessible to in the limits of the building. And the fact that the libraries can give that service is important. I will tell you maybe a short story. We went to the readers while we built the building. We consulted with the users, the current users. We also consulted with the future users. But we asked them, what do you prefer, books in the reading rooms or more cars? They said, we want actually to have cars. We want to have more space for us. But they said they prefer that not because they don't want to use the books, but we can give them a very fast service from the storage. And this is maybe it seems like a technical issue, but still it means that they use the books. They need the books. It's not only coming to the library with the laptop. And you rightly also mentioned the power of the professional staff, of the librarians, the specialists, those that have the wisdom and the knowledge of the collection, deep knowledge of the collection that can help users. And again, it's not only limited to the physical, because we also service them remotely. But the fact is that the users come to the library because of the collection, because they can meet each other and they can use the collection. So there are three actually elements that attract them to the building. And we really feel that this idea of a public institute that allows everything to be in, use the collection, recreate, engage in culture, is the meaning of the National Library.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would just say that there's some parallels in the museum field as well towards what's called open storage. So that it's not a matter of just treating the books in a very functional way that you have to store them and then you call up a book, but the idea of open storage. But the other is that from a research point of view, there's a tremendous interest in the material culture of books and in the history of reading and reading practices, so that our whole notion of a book is much more than the information that it contains or the ideas that it contains. It's also a cultural object, an artifact, and it has its own biography, history, and value as such. And that's not something that can be, quote, digitized. So, but maybe with that, there are a few questions. I think some of them are quite very, very specific, but let's see. Karen, do you want to bring us some questions?
Certainly, yes. We've had an interesting question and some comments from Wojtek Lewicki. I hope I've said your name correctly. And that's asking about digital strategies beyond just the scanning of resources. He's mentioning Polona, the Digital National Library, which you can access via the web, but not through his mobile. and generally focusing on social media. How do we use that for campaigns to promote resources? So sort of about taking the digital that bit further. And then there are some other questions related.
So Tomasz, Oren, who would like to take that?
I have a very short answer because our digital strategy, after 3.5 million items, it's digitize as many as possible. And the only challenge we have is a copyright. So we have this, the biggest issue is copyright law, which is a great obstacle in our activity in that. We have quite nice social media campaigns. We have very popular fan page in Facebook, and we think this cooperation with our users is quite good. And we will open that next year widely. Because we will have this anniversary of the opening of the first national library. So we will prepare special features for our digital users for next year. And I think this is so I can answer in the digital strategy right now.
Oren, did you want to comment?
Well, I will add that we have a very comprehensive digital strategy that, again, the digitization is only the first layer of it. We worked very heavily on discoverability of our collection in a commercial search engine. We our effort in the last few years is to increase usage as much as possible and make variation of the different usage. So first of all, open library means that developers or external organization can take the data that we have and use them in whatever way they think and develop application and products with our collection in what we call the API, that they can take chunk of the collections and use it in things that we couldn't think of. We also try to collaborate with Wikipedia as much as possible and take our collection, make them present through Wikipedia. We invest a lot in what we call search engine optimization. So our collection can be found when people search in Google, and we try to work that they will get higher ranking in results, because we don't think that people need to know about our site. They don't even need to know about the National Library of Israel. If they search something and we have it, they should find it and use it, even without knowing about the institution. And another leg of this strategy is partnership and collaboration with many other institutions, building infrastructure, national infrastructure, and sometimes international infrastructure by unifying collection. We, for example, building now what we called Israel Archive Network, trying to get collections from different archives and catalogs from them, and unifying those catalogs with the library's catalogs. So if you search, you will find everything, both from archives and libraries, on one platform, and hopefully we can add also in the future museums. So people don't really need to know where the information is, they just need to search it and they can find it wherever it is. So those are just a few examples of our digital strategies.
So just a question to two of you, also coming from the chat, and that is, how effectively are you able to deliver digital content on mobile devices?
Well, we have our site is completely adapted to mobile. Almost everything that we do is accessible in good quality in mobile, and We did some tests. We did launch an app, a music app for Israeli music that was lasted 2 years. And unfortunately, because of issues of budgets and royalties, we had to take it down, but it was very popular. So we are trying either, first of all, to make everything, of course, adaptable to mobile, and also try with apps from time to time. And really, we have a digital product department at the library that is engage with users, understand their needs, and develop new products all the time.
Great, great, thank you. And Tomasz?
Well, the site is quite modern, and app will be launched next year. So I think it will be efficient solution. I would like to add one thing to our discussion, because it's very important for us. We launched a digital interlibrary loan system when we connected all libraries, even in countryside, in rural areas, with the National Library. So every gifted young person in every part of Poland can use our stacks and can use our either copyright protected publications in their own library, public library. So this is great opportunity for students living outside major university places. So we want to open as much as we can. So because we have this terrible obstacle because of copyright, the 70 years of the protection after that of every author, we want to open all these publications through interlibrary loan. And now we have more than 2,000 libraries connected in such way with our reading room. So everybody in Polish countryside can use our stacks and can feel as a researcher in our on-site reading room.
Which is actually a wonderful, wonderful resource. Karen, are there any other questions from the chat?
There are a couple more. Stephanie's asking about the standards for access for medieval manuscripts for ecological and paleographic study in the age of digitization. And whilst digital images open wider viewing possibilities, what about the aspect of experience and materiality that can't be digitally reproduced?
Okay, all medieval manuscripts are digitized, so you can use all kind you need. We are preparing new tools for using medieval manuscripts with cooperation with other libraries, especially with Jagiellonian Library in Krakow. But you know, the major goal for us is to digitize as many as possible.
Oren,
Yeah,
do you want to respond?
I'll add to that developing new tools to work with manuscripts is something that is shared by many national library and academic libraries, new tools. For example, annotation, a transcription or automatic transcriptions, adding bibliographic notes to the manuscripts, that any reference to those in research, and building a common platform for researchers to work on manuscripts. The NLI now is integrating one of the biggest digital project that was done on the Cairo Gniza by the Friedberg Manuscript Society. And in this project, there are many different tools for the aid of the researchers. This, of course, is also incorporated in one of our digital projects called Ktiv, which is a unification of more than 80,000 Hebrew manuscripts from around the world on one platform. And there was also a question about the materiality and how the use of the manuscripts. So in the new building, We'll have a wonderful new reading room for the special collections that will allow researchers to come and use the physical, the manuscripts, the rare maps, the rare books. So we are not dismissing one for the other. We provide both.
Right. Well, that's of course, and there are things you can do. I mean, they have different value, essentially, and the opportunity to experience both, I think, is the way to go. Karen, any other questions?
There's a comment from Miri Shamir, who's saying that having heard the speakers talk about the independence of the National Library, she thinks that it is a good signal for the future. Then the perspective of years will be able to learn about the past without fears of the materials being politically biased. So this is a comment more than a question. We've had a private question, and I'm sure that our speakers won't have time to give a comprehensive answer to this, but Stephen has asked, what are the major collections in each library?
Actually, that was something that we did want to say. I mean, there has been a little bit of discussion of that, but maybe not just major collections, but perhaps what you consider to be unique collections, some of the most valuable material. Tomasz, do you want to start?
The worst question in my library life always. You know, we have 10 million items. Everything is precious. Of course, all these medieval manuscripts, which are in the origin of Polish state, are very precious for us. But I think ephemera is this part of our collections, which are very important for us, because sometimes this is the only source for part of the history we can see only on this sheet of paper. And sometimes this one copy survived can describe life of society of every particular individual better than large volumes. And I would like to present Jewish printed ephemera. You are trying to have one volume every year from different cities. This one is from Warsaw. So you can find here this all printed ephemera from Warsaw from the beginning of the 20th century. And I think this volume can describe better, sometimes better, real life than many historical monographs. So I'm very happy that we can cooperate, as Oren said, with newspapers, with old Jewish, Yiddish, Hebrew periodicals, as well as ephemera. And I hope we will expand this cooperation. And we will prepare every year such magnificent volume. This is bilingual, so it's in English and Polish as well.
Well, I have to say that I am definitely going onto your website to order a copy immediately. And also, you know, trained as an anthropologist, ephemera, and what appears at the time to be of no particular value, to understand its value, to collect it, to preserve it, that is really of enormous value. I mean, the hardest thing to find is yesterday's newspaper. That for me is the definition of ephemera, and the idea that that kind of material survived 100 years later is just spectacular. So, and I'm just thrilled that you've published that volume. Oren, do you want to respond to this question?
Well, I would say that I would mention maybe things that surprisingly are in Jerusalem. Nobody would expect to have that the National Library of Israel would have a collection of Isaac Newton's paper, thousands of those.
Isaac Newton.
Isaac Newton.
How did that material come to the library?
Well, this is a very interesting story. There was an auction that the economics Keynes that was interested in the non-theological writings of Isaac Newton, bought it by mistake. And there is a collector called Avraham Yehuda that was interested in actually in the theological part of the collection, and he bought the other part, so they replaced it later. And at a later time, he donated those to the National Library of Israel with other collection that he collected. We also have a very large and important collection of Islamic manuscripts, more than 2,000 of those. And we are now in a digitization project of all of those, and they will be accessible to the world. Well, we have a very rare collection of maps from the land of Israel and Jerusalem, maybe the biggest and the most important one in the world. And as Tomasz said, we have a very large collection of ephemeral that represent both the land of Israel and the state of Israel at the library. And also we are in charge of the National Sound Archives, where we have every musical piece, both Jewish and Israeli, that was ever recorded in our collection, as many as hundreds of archives of music, composers, creators, and so on.
Wonderful, wonderful, thank you. Karen, what else do we have?
Yeah, Rita's just asked, maybe Tomasz, somebody or you or someone could put up the title of the Ephemera book. There seems to be interest in that.
It's going to be listen, Tomasz, it's going to be a bestseller. That's all I can tell you.
I think we would like. Yeah, somebody's put it up in the chat. I think that's yes. That looks to be the title. Thank you, Alexandra. So that's in the chat. And there's a question which I know the answer to, but I'll ask. Stephen has asked specifically. Are we housing the collection of Gershom Scholem?
Yes, we do. We have the Gershom Scholem collection. It is developed largely after getting the collection. So we now have in the collection something like 30,000 books and manuscripts connected to Kabbalah in the Gershom Scholem collection, which is very unique and very heavily used.
And Oren, do you have his desk? I can't remember Do you want to say something about having preserved more than the books?
Yeah, we actually got the collection and the library, and I think a very important part of the collection is his marks on the books themselves, which are of course part of the collection. And in the new building, we will have a special area for this collection and this library as we do today.
So will you recreate his study?
Well, it's not a replica for his study, but we will continue to have his desk in the new building in the reading room.
Right, the desk I remember. I think that's
we have some memories.
It's evocative. I think it's evocative. Tomasz, do you have? I know there's a museum of literature in Warsaw. And I remember a very, very beautiful, it used to be their permanent exhibition of Mickiewicz. And it had a lot of in writers museums, literature museums, which are more common in Europe. I don't remember a literature museum in America. But one of the attractions is the material culture of a writer's life. I mean, also the Pantadeusz Museum in Wrocław. So I don't know, does the National Library also have some of the material culture associated with writers and libraries and things like that?
Yes, of course, because our stocks are very large and we can receive not only papers, not only personal papers and archives, but also everything connected with them. So we have archives and such memorable objects from Czesław Miłosz, Agnieszka Osiecka.
Well, for example.
How to call it in English? Oh dear.
Something they wrote with, like, pens, typewriters.
That's obvious, but I'm thinking about the even uniforms were received from Institute Maison Lafitte the Literary Institute in Maison Lafitte. So we have four, is that the proper four code of Marek Chłasko, which was donated to Agnieszka Osiecka, and we received that. So we have quite big a problem with conservation and preservation issues connected with that. But of course, we have many. Among them, some objects connected with Franciszka Temerson and Stefan Temerson. So many objects like furniture we can find in these donations, these legacies we received. And sometimes this is a very difficult question for us because it's not easy to preserve many different objects like military uniforms, for instance, or part of furniture, quite important for the history, but very difficult to preserve in good condition. So we have many, and we have many writers who declares that they will transfer such objects to us.
Yeah, you know, I'm intrigued, of course, you know, coming from a museum, I'm intrigued by that material. And I once saw a marvelous exhibition of furniture associated with reading. It is an entire universe between those reading wheels and Linnaeus's reading horse. And I think, you know, there's, I would say there is a kind of a world of material culture that's associated with books. You know, I'm thinking here of the Plantus Moretus Museum in Antwerp, which is a museum of printing in the historic printing house. That like there's a kind of a whole culture around the physical production of books, not only the writing of them, not only the authors, not only the information in them, but it's you can start to move out. When the minute that you move a little bit out, you're dealing with a kind of a ramified universe around books and all of the practices associated with them. And they exceed what we think of as the role of the library. But actually, I think that for the public, they're fascinating. They're absolutely fascinating. And you know, I assume you do exhibitions, right, at your library. I mean, I've seen exhibitions there. I don't know to what extent this material ever makes its way into an exhibition.
It is indeed interesting, and we will open this 17th century palace of the Commonwealth in Old Town, probably in 5 years. And part of this palace will be dedicated to writers' studies, and we will try to display all the subjects we discuss about.
Well, Oren, what about the National Library?
Well, actually, our policy is to limit ourselves to what we call the not to go to three-dimensional objects. In principle, we have some exceptions for those, and we're certainly going to use them in the exhibition space, that in the new exhibition, the permanent exhibition in the new building. But we try to limit ourselves not to get involved in those problems that Tomasz has in preservation and space.
Okay, understood. Karen, do we have anything else?
No, I think that's fine. We've covered nearly all of the questions.
Great. So I would ask Tomasz and Oren, do you have any questions for each other?
We know each other, I think, quite well. So.
Any questions that you would like to ask so that we could hear the answer?
Well, that's an exciting something that we should have known before, but well, I think that I don't have a question, but I think something that is quite unique to libraries and librarians is the spirit of cooperation. Libraries has this spirit for many years, and we we have very good networks, professional networks that relate to each other and cooperate. So in terms of professionalism and courtesy, this is something that is rooted in libraries. And I appreciate this. This is part of the fun of the profession.
Absolutely. And I think also that you have a history of cooperating with each other, which I think is a very, really something to hold up as a model. So I think maybe with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank you both for a very illuminating and very, very enjoyable conversation. I think that for many of our listeners, they haven't really, I mean, they love libraries, they use libraries, but have not necessarily thought deeply, historically, critically about the National Library as a unique kind of institution with a unique history and a unique role. And these two libraries are beautifully paired in the way in which each illuminates the other. So I want to thank you both for sharing your thoughts, your experience, and your visions for these two really wonderful, extremely important institutions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen to close us out.
Thank you very much. And many, many thanks to you, Barbara, for facilitating such a fascinating discussion, which has gone on far longer than we had told everybody. So Tomasz, we're very grateful that you've been with us through this evening, and we look forward to remaining in contact and invite everybody to join more sessions on our reading room, wherever you are. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Oren.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Nami.